both Benny and I have pretty much admitted that live tracking with a great band is our preferred situation.
Yeah.
Now, that's going to naturally make all of you want to do that. And again, I want to drive home the point that usually, like 99% of the time, actually, I'm going overdub.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. I am your host, Benedikt, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Malcolm Owen Flood. How are you, buddy?
Hey, Benny. I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm good, too. Thank you.
Awesome.
How was your week, or the past 2 weeks, basically, that we haven't met?
It was awesome, yeah. I did some cool gigs, had some good time off, got out on the water on my brother's boat a bunch of times. So, yeah, very solid week. You had a solid one as well. I saw you sent me a video of you finishing a marathon. That's awesome, man. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Just to be clear, it was a half marathon this time. So it was a
right.
Yeah. It was like a training run more than anything, like a prep race for the big one coming up.
Mm-hmm.
But it was amazing.
So that's about 21 kilometers for a half. How long is the full one you're doing again?
This is going to be an ultra marathon. This is going to be 68 kilometers with 2,500 meters of elevation gain.
Ooh, all right, that's a killer.
Mountain run.
Yeah, well, I will say that in that video of you finishing your half marathon, you looked very leisurely. You didn't look like it was that hard on you at all. So looks like the training's
might
working,
have looked
man.
like it. Yeah, might have looked like it, but like it was tough, to be honest. It was super hot. It was super hot, and it was straight out of training. I'm basically running a half marathon every weekend now for the past couple of weeks, and sometimes more than that, just as part of the training. So I didn't have proper rest and everything before that, but it went well. And
awesome.
Yeah, and I have a cool story actually to share when it comes to that race, and it is audio or not audio related, but related to our community, because when I was close to the finish line, few hundred meters or so before the finish line, there was Stefan and Diane from a band called the Ghost Cats on the side cheering me on, and they are part of our community. Stefan is an academy member, an academy student, and he's a runner himself, and he lives close to where the race was, and he actually came out to support me and cheer me on, and I was very, very happy to see them there. It was a super cool moment, and then we met after the finish, and it was very, very awesome. The whole finish was amazing. First, Stefan and Diane, and then my kids also, like, they ran in and joined me when we crossed the finish line, which was pretty amazing. So that whole finish was, but definitely a moment to remember. And
awesome.
Shout out and thank you so much to the Ghost Cats and Stefan and Diane. This really made my day to see you there.
Awesome. Love it. That's great.
Yeah, that was cool.
Well,
and I missed my time goal by 8 seconds, by the way. That was the not so fun part. I wanted to run like a sub 2 hour, which was challenging because there was a very steep, long hill in the middle of it that I completely underestimated, and it was hot like hell. But I still wanted to do sub 2 hours. And actually, when I saw Stefan, he was like, "Benny, you were on track for a sub 2 hour finish. Like, go, like, pick it up, you know." And I was looking at my watch, and I'm like, "Why am I not sprinting? Actually, it's super close." And then I picked it up, and I was hoping to make it, but I ended up finishing at 2 hours and 8 seconds instead of sub 2. So Stefan, next time, please, like, be there, I don't know, 100 meters earlier or so I can start
have a
sprinting
sharp
earlier.
stick to poke you with. Get going.
Yeah, exactly. No, it was awesome. It was awesome.
Oh, that's great.
So,
yeah, race days are always very fun. So well done.
Thank you. Yeah, other than that, I'm back from vacation and stoked to be working on music again and stoked to be doing this again. And I can't wait to dive into today's episode.
Yeah. This is a topic that's like kind of top of mind for me as I just finished mixing an album that relates to this topic, I think, anyways. So yeah, we should just jump into it, I think.
Perfect. Okay, so today we're going to talk about live recording versus overdubs. And you know, like when you record a band, you can do that by capturing a live performance where everybody or parts of the band is playing together in real time, or by recording overdubs, which means one player at a time. And we've been talking about how to record a live band, or how to like the basics of it and how to approach that. But we haven't really talked about who this is a good fit for. Like, so which is better, live or overdubs, and how do you pick the right approach? And it's funny because there is an ongoing and also probably never-ending discussion out there on this topic. Like, some people say you need to record live in order to capture the right feel and vibe, and others appreciate the flexibility and control you get from doing it piece by piece. So this might be confusing for you as a listener if you read this online and you see these different opinions, and some people are very have strong opinions on that, and you might be wondering what the right approach is for you. And yeah, let's just talk about that. Do you think it's necessary in order for, like, if you want to capture the right vibe and feel and everything, do you think it's necessary to do it live as a band? Do you think you can't pull that off with overdubs? Like, what's your opinion on that? Because that's what some people are saying, right?
Right. No, I think you can pull it off with the overdub. Well, I know you can pull it off with the overdub vibe. There's plenty of recordings that people think, oh, this must be live, but it's totally not. And in fact, overdubs is kind of the norm at this point. There's so much increased flexibility and power on the engineering side of things, and then because of that, on the mixing side of things, it's definitely like a safer approach usually to go with the overdubs. That said, and I think this would surprise some people that know me, doing live bed tracks is like by far my favorite way to make a record. It's just not something that I think we can do very often. And we'll get into those reasons as to why I decide. Now I'm kind of speaking in past tense, but because I'm not producing bands anymore. But generally, when I meet a band, I have to make that decision, and I would have to make that decision, and I would usually choose to go to the overdubbed route rather than the live recording route. Even though live recording, if the stars all align, is going to be more affordable, faster. It's going to be more flexible because you can change like the arrangement in real time with the band. We're like, okay, let's just like strip down the second verse. Let's build into the last chorus. Let's just all drop out except for the acoustic guitar on the bridge. Like, you can make these decisions and have them happen just as quick as you say them. With overdubs, that is really the biggest thing I can say against overdubs, is that you don't have that ability really. You've got scratch tracks, hopefully a lot of them, which is going to increase some flexibility, but you're kind of like, you've got a drummer in the room and he can't just have the strumming pattern change on the guitar in real time anymore, So you're kind of locked into these decisions that were made during the scratch track pre-pro. So live recording can kind of unlock magic in that you can change the production, the songs and arrangement so quick and in real time. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on.
Sorry, you mean overdubs can do that, right? Not live recording.
No. I think overdubs are less flexible. I think overdubs.
Okay. All right. That's interesting.
Because yeah, like, you've got a guitar track that's got like a strumming pattern, and the drummer's playing to that, right? So if we want that to change, we'd have to re-record the scratch.
Yeah. Okay.
The band can make decisions in real time, which I think is just magical.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so that I don't want this to be confusing to the listener, but that's very interesting, because I thought of the overdub method to be of the more flexible one, right? Because but you're right, it's probably not. I mean, it's more flexible in that you can do more afterwards to the tones, and you can manipulate things more because there's no bleed and all of that. But when it comes to arrangements and the songs, yes. When it comes to the arrangement and that sort of stuff, live is definitely more flexible. You're totally right. I haven't even thought about that, but that's totally right. So you're saying that it's mostly like the technical pitfalls and and like potential pitfalls and technical requirements that you have to be aware of in order to be able to make an educated decision there and like choose what the right approach is for you. And it's mostly about those technical things. And if you know what you're doing and you pick the right one, then both can be great and give you the flexibility you need. You just have to decide if you want to be flexible in the beginning or if you want to save the flexibility for later, basically.
Yep, exactly. If you know the song's locked down, then overdubs is the way to go. Like, if nothing's really going to change, then definitely go that way. Now, really though, the main reason I usually go overdubs is because there's no feeling worse than setting up a band that you think is going to record live really well and then hitting play for the first time and having them play the song and this like sinking feeling of being like, oh, this is really not tight. In fact, this is a disaster and there's no way to claw back out of this now. Well, there is. You just like delete all the other instruments and it becomes an overdub recording. But it's really like you spend so much time on the setup for a live recording, trying to get all the tones pretty darn perfect, right? And knowing that it's going to be less flexible than an overdub recording. So it takes longer to set up, but you're tracking all these instruments at the same time. So in theory, it'll be quicker. But yeah, if the band's not tight enough, it's really, really tough and it really doesn't work well. And I would say that unless I'm hiring session musicians, it's almost always going to be overdubbed. It's like session musicians or the tightest band I've ever worked with are like the only ones that I'm like comfortable going into a live recording with generally. I may be a little tighter on that than some people are. Some people are more willing to let bands have a go at the live beds, but in my experience, it's never been awesome unless the band is like top tier.
Yes, I agree. And I love how you put it in the notes there. You said like with a great band, life is faster and thus more affordable, more flexible, and more fun. And with a bad band, the opposite is true, which is really the case. Like it takes longer. It's more frustrating. It's definitely not more affordable because it takes longer, and you might have to stop the session entirely and start over again, and or get back to practice and whatever. So yeah, it really comes down to how good the band is and how well rehearsed they are, how good the pre-pro and preparation is also, I think. Like if you just got to be prepared, and you got to be, and with the pre-production, it's kind of weird because I think if a band is really, really good, then maybe you can get away with a less detailed sort of pre-pro because they can change on the spot and like they can be flexible and they can just change something real quick and still like nail the take. And I think if a band is less experienced or if they are not as good when it comes to their playing, then the pre-pro has to be even more detailed and better just because they won't be able to pull it off quickly and without problems. So in the studio. So that's the thing. So in a weird way, like really good musicians can kind of not skip the pre-pro, but they can come in less prepared with their songs because they will be able to just do it if you tell them what to do or if they, figure out what the song's going to be on the spot.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think a type of job that I've probably done more than you in your niche, Benny, is working with a singer-songwriter that comes in with just an acoustic guitar and like a song that they can play on an acoustic guitar, but they've never had a band on it. And until I bring in the session musicians to that recording session, there's never been a band on the song at all. So we're skipping pre-production in all senses other than what's living in our heads and just the song, like workshopping the song with the artist. But if I hire professional session musicians, it's not going to be a problem at all. They'll probably have the perfect part already, and if not, like a little bit of feedback and they've got it. And again, that's the situation where I want pro players and I want to grab it live. And it can just be so like, studio magic, like these crazy ideas and like things that just happen in the studio. That's when this happens, is when you've got a band in there. It can really just be like, oh, the song just transformed. I didn't see it coming.
Oh yeah, totally. Now, what do you think? Like, how does a band know if they are good enough? Like, how do you know as a band? Because that's tricky. Because people will be like, I mean, we know our songs. We are good players. We know what we're doing. But I think a lot of people are lacking the awareness, maybe, or like just because of a lack of experience, they might think they're good enough, but they don't really know what good enough actually means and how good these pro players actually are. So, what do you think? How can I, as a band, determine whether we're good enough to do it live, or whether we were better off just doing a proper pre-pro and then doing overdubs because live is going to be a disaster? Like, how do we know that?
Right. Okay. For me, there's a couple qualifying things. There's genre is probably an easy one to like just rule things out with. The faster and more distorted your music is, probably the less likely you should go live. There's an argument to be said for like really raw punk. And Benny, I'm sure you could speak that more than I have because I haven't really done that. But that's a good rule of thumb. So if you're a metal band where things have to be very precise and there's lots of things fighting against you, aka distortion, which can make, like, if you're not playing clean, it gets messy really quick, right? So those kind of things, the bleed of those super loud instruments is another thing that makes it harder to do live. And everything's just being smashed, right? So like the more intense and fast and precise the music, the less I am pulled towards going live. Where country rock, blues rock, that stuff totally can work live. So you know, when I say live, I usually only mean bass, drums, maybe keys, maybe a guitar. The vocals are always overdubbed for me. I should mention that. So it's kind of live beds for me. But it doesn't have to be. Everybody, you know, you can do it different ways. But that is almost always how it's gone for me. So there's that. There's the genre qualifying, and then there's the band qualifying. We've said it before on this podcast, but there's a huge difference between being a really good player and being a really good studio player. It's a different skill set entirely. You might be an absolute ace live, but really not kind of have that studio game figured out yet. And that just comes with experience. You just have to practice playing in the studio with a metronome, of course, and not only with the metronome, but being able to play to the metronome in that, you know, you can be behind the beat if you need to be, you can be ahead of the beat, you can be on the beat. And then also getting used to headphone monitoring and stuff like that. So you can like control how you play in that new environment, because it's different than, you know, with mains and a crowd in front of you. There's the precision of hitting your drums consistently for that studio thing, you know, where you're hitting your snare so you're getting like the same tuning and note every time, right? And dynamics. The dynamic control of playing in the studio is a different beast than live again. So there's all of these things, and I just picked on the drummer, huge there. But like that studio experience is what it comes down to. It really does, even though it's a live recording, you still need a studio master for each instrument. And now one more thing is that, say you've got the ace drummer that's done this 100 times in the studio. You've got the guitarist, the best guitarist in the world, which is really hard to do live. I think guitar is probably one of the harder parts to grab live. But your bassist is all over the place. The whole thing falls apart at that point. That bassist is going to cause the guitarist and the drummer to suck. Like it has to be a full card of great players for this live thing to work. There can't be one weak link where they drag everybody down to their level.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think those were all really great points. And I also think that if you're unsure whether whether you are as a band or your songs or whatever are good enough to do the live recording, I think outside feedback is crucial, because I think you should record yourself, even if it's just one microphone in the room or something. You should record yourself when you play live, or you should definitely do that, and then have a listen. And then if you're unsure if that is good enough, if you're tight enough, if that would work in a live, like when it comes to live recording, I would just send that recording to somebody else and ask for feedback. I think that is really, really crucial, because if you send it to someone like Malcolm or myself, or, you know, if you plan on having Malcolm or myself or whoever to mix those songs, then you should probably, before you even start recording, you should send those early recordings to someone, and they will tell you if it's a good idea to do it live or not. Probably, at least I would. If you would send me that, I would be like, maybe you should do overdubs, or maybe you can do these two things together, but maybe overdub the vocal or whatever. You know, like, get outside feedback. I think that's almost the only way, because I've just experienced it so often where bands were really confident about their songs and their ability to record and play, and then they were disappointed when they heard that the recording really wasn't good enough, or like didn't work as they wanted. So because it's just hard to know whether it's good enough if you're not experienced. So just get outside feedback. And an easy way to do that, by the way, is if you book a call with me, for example. If you go to the selfrecordingband.com/call, and you just book a free 1-hour call with me, and you upload a recording of yourself in the Jam Space. We can easily figure out if that is a genre and something you could record live, or if you would be better off doing overdubs. And yeah, so just go to theselfrecordingband.com/call and book that call, and then we can help you figure that out. And other than that, I think it's really, and other than that, I think it's really, I don't know. I would also look at other bands and songs that you like and learn how that was done, like how that sound was done. Because if, for example, if you're a fan of, you mentioned it before, Malcolm, of like really raw punk or even hardcore metal stuff, there's not only the super polished, super tight metal, but there is like a very raw, aggressive style that is often done live. And if you are a fan of those bands, like, again, I've mentioned him before too, Kurt Ballou comes to mind, or like other people who do similar genres. If you're a fan of that aesthetic, maybe live or partly live is a thing that could be interesting for you to do. But if you're a fan of like very polished modern metalcore or something, overdubs are probably the way to go. And same with like singer-songwriters or country. If you're a fan of that sort of stuff, you might be able to do it live. But if it's like a super modern pop arrangement, then again, overdubs might be the thing. Just do some research on the things you love and you listen to, and figure out how that was done, and then you might help you get some clarity, I think.
Absolutely. Now, this description of like my thoughts, I kind of had a monologue there, but also Benny's, I think, is really from a bit of a privileged point of view, in that we have access to all the gear if we wanted to do something live. Now, on a podcast called The Self-Recording Band, that does change things a little bit. Because obviously recording a band live is going to take a lot more gear than the overdubbed approach. You're talking at least double the track count all of a sudden. And there's little tricks, and we won't get into it because we have episodes about how to do live recordings. But, like being able to grab DIs and amp captures, so 2 channels per guitar, is a huge advantage. That's really going to, keep some of that overdub flexibility that we're used to in modern mixing, while still also grabbing the live thing. So it's way more gear. So if that limit is a limitation, then just don't worry about it. Just go overdubbed. Just don't let that be like, we can't record yet because we need to save up and buy way more gear so we can do it live, because I think that's the right way. Just don't worry about it. If you do a good job overdubbing, it's like, that's not going to make it sound like it's stale. That's not a thing. Don't worry about it. So there's the gear thing. I will say, and I've said this before, but people really don't like it, is that professional bands do often hire certain session players to fill certain jobs in the studio. It is a thing where, the drummer gets swapped out for the record. The less professional the band, the more people have a problem with that, it seems. But I just want to say, I'm trying to normalize this. It's a thing. It can work. It's okay if you're adults about it. There's that. There's the editing side of things. If you're doing your own editing, be aware that editing a live track thing is a much harder thing to do than an overdub thing. I would say impossible if you're not quite good. It's really an art form of editing. How to make all those things work together, and being aware of the relationships. So that's another qualifying thing, that if it's going to require some good editing, you're going to want to farm that out, or again, consider going overdubbed.
Yes, you got to know what you're getting yourself into. Like you should just make a plan and know what the consequences are, basically. And if you were okay with those consequences, then it might be a very fun thing to do. You just got to know that it's going to be not as tight probably, and you can't do much about it, as you just said, with the editing. But that might be okay, because you put it in the notes there as well, Malcolm. If your audience is conditioned to a bit of looseness, if they know that, if that's part of the genre, then, and they don't expect a super tight performance, maybe you can get away with it and with minimal editing. So you just got to know who your audience is, what the aesthetic is that you like, and what you're getting yourself into, basically. And I also like that you brought up the technical part, like the technical requirements. And because not only do you need more inputs and more, like as many options as you can, basically to keep some of the technical flexibility, you also need to think about the outputs of your interface, because you need a couple of monitor outs simultaneously for different monitor and headphone mixes. So if you have some of the common like prosumer or like cheaper interfaces, they might have enough inputs, but you might only have a couple of outputs that you can use, and you might need more of them so that everybody can get their headphone mix, or like let alone a stereo headphone mix. So all those things, you just need to know what you need when it comes to gear. I think if you're one of those bands who have a digital desk or something, that could be an advantage, and then you could try live recording. Those things are good for that. Like if it's an interface and desk in one, sort of, that gives you the flexibility usually with the routing and the ins and outs and all of that. But still, you got to know what you're getting yourself into. And I have two more thoughts here and two questions for you, Malcolm. What about when people say like, okay, all good, but for us it's mostly about like it should be fun. We want it to be fun, and we know that we are not super tight, and we know that there's limitations and all of that, but we just enjoy playing live, and we just don't like the thought of doing it individually. And is this a valid like argument? Is it something that where you would say, well, then just go for it and do it, like, or are you like, no, yeah? Because I think some people are hearing this and they're like, yeah, we might not be good enough, but we still want to do it because it seems fun, And I don't want to tell people that they can't do it, So
absolutely, I think you're right. If it's just something you want to do, it's a great time. It's also a great way to demo your songs as well and get some experiences. Just set up and record it that way. There's no reason not to do it if you want to do it. It's just like then just do it. I guess. One maybe misconception that some people have is that you can't really do both, and you totally can. You could record all of your stuff live, including vocals, and then you just peel back as needed. So you're like, okay, the vocals got way too much bleed. Delete or hide, whatever you need to do. It's a good idea to hide it, because sometimes there's like delivery things in a live recording that you want to reference when you're recapturing the vocal. So you just peel back. Say one of the guitars is totally tight enough, but the other guitars does not. Well, delete that track if you manage bleed and stuff in your setup, and overdub that guitar now. You can do that. And then there's also, of course, like when we say bed tracks, that means that we're usually just recording some of the instruments, like rhythm instruments only. Here's an idea, actually. Not an idea, but a thought. I was always the guitarist in my bands, so I was usually recording drums and bass and not guitar live if I was doing live beds for my own band, because I'm busy listening and engineering, or maybe I'm playing a totally throwaway, crappy one as a guide for them, kind of thing. But the more there is going on, the harder it is for me to monitor that the quality of all of them is good. So there's actually a skill level part for whoever's engineering the session in the band as well, because they've got too much to think about. And it is a learned skill to be able to pick apart where the problem is when there's a whole bunch of instruments going on. So I guess you might also want to consider that. If it's overwhelming for your engineer, Overdubs probably gets another point.
Yeah, I think so too. Totally. And if you're the engineer yourself, that's even, that's a problem in and of itself. Like even with overdubs, and if you're doing it live and have to manage all these things, can be difficult for sure. And my second question for you would be, Malcolm, what if people want to play live, but still only but still do it without bleed? Because that's also a possibility. You could, and I've done that before. You could put everybody in a room and just grab DIs. And the only loud thing in the room basically are the drums. Everybody else is just playing into DI boxes, and everybody has their headphone mix with amp sims on instead of real amps, for example.
Yep.
And maybe you put the singer in another room, or you overdub vocals later. But I've recorded entire live performances without bleed, basically, except for some very quiet strumming or so from the guitars in the room. But that way, you could have an isolated drum kit. You could have isolated DIs that you can reamp later. And you can have isolated vocals in a different booth or room. And do you think that there's an advantage to doing that? That would be my question. Like, do you think that the feel and vibe and everything actually benefits from doing that? Or do you think that the vibe and all of that can be done just as well and captured just as well if you do overdubs and just focus on one player at a time? So it's a two-part question. The first question is, do you think that is a good approach in general or something you would do occasionally? And the second part is, do you think that there's actually a benefit to doing this?
Yeah, I do think it's a good idea. I do think there's a benefit. Again, the it just offers so much flexibility in editing and in mixing, having DIs and no bleed essentially. Or at least low bleed. I think my favorite is to grab those DIs, but actually still have the amps going as well. So it's not just a DI, but I would really be concerned about if that's bleeding too much into the drum room mics, for example. It would definitely be a concern. But I would like to try and grab the actual tone kind of thing. But again, I speak from I've got 32 inputs. This is no problem. I can do both. So it's probably not everyone's situation. So then it kind of comes down to if you don't have enough channels to do both, I think there's a little bit of a genre decision again. If it's going to require heavy editing and reamping is probably an advantage, like metal, then DI, way to go. If it's your amp is the sound that your whole thing is this super important thing, then you got to throw the mic on. You're going to need that. There's no way to do it otherwise. So I think you can, in a perfect world, you do both. What was the second part of your question?
Do you think that the songs will actually benefit from doing that? Do you think that people playing together, being able to look at each other and all these things, does that help the performance? Does that help the songs? Or is that sort of a myth and you can pull off the right feel and vibe and everything with overdubs just as well?
I'd have to say myth. I think that you can pull it off with overdubs just as well. Not that maybe it live, it's hard to answer.
I know, and it's so tough because there's these different opinions online, and people have, as I said, really strong opinions on that. And you'll find big names saying overdub, you can do everything with overdubs, and you find big names who swear by doing it live, and that's the only way. So that's why I'm asking, what's your opinion on that? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've never had a problem making an overdub record move, but I think it's really just the gratification comes sooner with a live thing if they're tight again. And you know what? Actually, I would argue the opposite. I would argue that with an untight band live, you're gonna have a worse feeling record. So if the US engineer need to help the band along to have that that gel, that glue, then overdubs is the way to go.
Yeah, totally. And here's a hot take. I think in some cases, some interviews that I've heard, and I won't say any names here, but some interviews that I heard and some of those opinions who were you got to do it live, that's the only way to capture vibe and feel and all of that. It sometimes feels like it comes from people who kind of want to justify having all the gear and stuff that they have. So they came. Oftentimes they came up in a different era. Sometimes they are used to doing it all analog on big consoles. They have the gear, the rooms, and all of that. And this stuff costs a lot of money. They've invested heavily into that, and they have that sitting around. And it's almost sometimes, and I might be wrong, it's just the feeling that I sometimes get. It seems like they just want to use it because they have it and they want to justify keeping it and they want to do it their way. And that's sort of their brand also. And it's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I still think that it's not the only way. And I think that, just because it works for them doesn't mean you couldn't record the same bands with overdubs and the minimal equipment and sort of thing, I just feel like, I don't know and I would be the same probably if I had a big analog console and a huge live room and all those things. Maybe I would make bands record live more if they were good, just so I can use all the stuff and do the cool live things, But that doesn't mean it's the only way. So, that's maybe I don't know. That's the feeling that I get, and I think both can work, and it always comes down to the band and the players. And I think a lot of people who swear by the live thing also are used to working with really good people too, with really good bands.
Yeah. It's a common top-down thing from the old school guys who are still working with top tier bands, like professional bands that have been recording that whole way their whole career. That's a thing, right? And most of my live tracked favorite albums, like are live beds. Like there's a lot of overdubs going on top of them to give the polish over top of it. Like that is a huge percentage of modern country. For example, is like a Wrecking Crew type session band laying down beds, and then a lot of really tasteful overdubs on top of it, and you get a great feeling, a great sounding record. That and like I said earlier, with the session musicians set up live, they're building the song in the room as well. It's really cool. And this is something to mention. You always hear about like bands that are like, oh, we cut 9 songs in like 2 days. And it's like, wow, that's really impressive. And then, first timer band hears that and they're like, yeah, let's just book 1 day in the studio. We'll cut the whole album.
Yes.
And it's like, no, it's like that's the Wrecking Crew coming in and cutting 9 songs. The songs are already written for one by like a great songwriter and a producer, and then they hired a bunch of musicians that could come and just like one take them.
Yes, exactly. The work has been done beforehand. Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
But that's a happy Malcolm when I've got that situation. When I've got like a handful of great songs and an amazing band in the room with great tech instruments, it's like, wow, we're going to really crush a lot of tracks today. It's not going to take a lot. It's so cool.
Yeah. See, that's the thing. I might sound like I prefer overdubs, and I think it's the better option for most people. But on the other hand, if it is a good fit for you to do it live, and if you can pull it off, and the tech is there, you know how to operate it, you know how to play the songs, it's good players, all of that. It's just a good day, and then magic happens, then I love doing that. Like I actually prefer it. Like I think live is like a good live recording session is so much fun, and I would love to do all records like that, basically. So I'm not against that. I just think it's very rare that all those pieces come together so well. So that's the thing.
It's really great. It lets you think about the song more than the individual like micros or like instrumental sounds kind of thing, thinking about the drum beat rather than the snare tone. That's always a good thing. That's totally a good, like we've said it before, the song is really everything at the end of the day. So by having that all lined up, we're able to do that. But it's all based on the assumption that everything else is taken care of. So that is that's kind of the trick.
Yeah, totally. So how do we sum that up? Like what's a good actionable advice there for bands? Like how do you know which is the right approach for you? Because it's kind of hard to answer. Can we give a definite like sort of answer?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I think your suggestion earlier in this episode is like the number one actionable thing people can do if they don't have enough gear to do this to a further degree, which I think most of our listeners probably do. But bare minimum, a metronome app with some headphones on the drummer. They count in really tight the first 8 beats or something, and then the song starts. That lets somebody like myself or Benny line it up to whatever BPM the song was recorded at. And that's just one microphone in the room that can hear those stick count-ins and then the rest of the band. Like this is, again, the bare minimum setup. And now you could send that to me. I could line that up. Okay, you recorded at 120. Line up those 4 clicks to 120, and I've kind of got a visual grid of how tight the band's playing. I also have an audible grid where I can, audible reference where I can hear how tight the band is playing to that as well. That's only one person with the click in their head, but that's actually how a lot of people like to play. You know what? We've never talked about referencing techniques. That's a podcast episode. Like monitoring techniques about how musicians figure out how they play best in the studio. Like I know a lot of bass players that turn off the click and only play to the drummer if they're tracking live. Yeah, stuff like that. So okay, we'll get back to that. That's a totally different episode.
Yeah.
But,
good idea though. You're saying for a demo recording, right? What was what you just suggested, like doing the
for how to figure out if you're good enough. You set up one mic and have your drummer on a metronome and play the song to that, and then you can send that to somebody like Benny, book a call with Benny, have him listen to it and assess it, and now he's able to say, okay, how is this band play? How is this drummer playing to a click, and how is this band playing to a drummer? Essentially, right? And now the more you can do on that, like if you have a multi-track recording, everybody can hear the click or whatever it is, or have separated tracks, even if it's still just the drummer with the click track, that'll give also more and folks will be able to easier figure out who is kind of the weak link, like who's behind. And also like when I'm assessing a band for live, I'm like, okay, who has tone hands? If somebody doesn't have tone hands, I can't really risk a live recording with that person in there. Like they all have to have their tone. They have to sound amazing. So and then based on that might equal, okay, no, sorry, this is going to be an overdub album, or okay, this is going to be a live bed tracks, but this person and this person aren't going to be included in the live beds. We're going to overdub them because of reason X, Y, and B. So that I think that's a great idea, Benny. Just make a demo recording to a click track and then have somebody assess it, and then go from there.
All right. Yeah, for sure. And then, so that's number one. Then number two is like do some research, I think, on productions and bands and songs you like, and figure out how they were done, how the producers you like, how they typically operate, how they make their records. If you like a certain sound and you figure out that it's always done live, then maybe you should try it. And then, of course, just be honest with yourself and try to be, the self-awareness thing is huge. I think you just have to, if you listen to your recordings and you listen to yourself play, and if you get feedback from someone and it's just objectively not really tight, then maybe do overdubs. But if you can really say, no, I like how that sounds, like I like how tight it is, I don't want it to be any tighter, then you might be ready to do it live. And this doesn't mean it has to be perfect. Like whatever is tight enough means to you. You just have to be honest, and you have to know that it might stay that way because there is only so much you can do in editing. So you got to know that this is really what you want, and if so, then go for it. And then part three is the simple technical requirements that you need to have. Do you have enough monitor outs? Do you have enough inputs? Do you have a room that sounds good enough? That's also a thing, maybe. Like if you have a really, really crappy jam space, like a crappy sounding jam space, it might be easier to isolate individual things and do overdubs than do a full loud live band in there. So just assess the gear and the room and all of that. That's probably step 3. And if you've done that and like you got the feedback that it will actually work, and you like it yourself, and you have the gear to do it, and you think it's going to be fun, then thumbs up. Go ahead.
Right.
I think.
Okay. One thing I want to end this on is that both Benny and I have pretty much admitted that live tracking with a great band is our preferred situation. Now, that's going to naturally make all of you want to do that because you're like, well, that means it's better. And again, I want to drive home the point that usually like 99% of the time, actually, I'm going overdub. So it's probably not for you. It's probably not for you. And it doesn't mean your band sucks. It doesn't mean that you're crappy musicians. Again, generally the music I work on is better overdubbed. I like mixing, like I can make the mix come together and the production choices come together that are in my head naturally, usually better with an overdub as well. And there's so many more positives to going overdub, especially for bands that are new to the studio. And I think the main one is that you'll definitely come out, every person in the band will come out a much better musician after being under the microscope of overdubbing. The drummer is never heard themselves so clearly and had to look their bad habits in the face so closely as when they go into a studio for the first time. And same with the guitarist. You might think you're tight, but you're probably going to be like, wow, string scrapes all over the place. I keep hitting that low E when I'm meant to be only hitting the A string, and like stuff like that. My palm mutes are all over the place. I'm holding like certain chord out of tune. Bass players, you're always late. That there's a huge advantage, and that is how, like, we always say, like, there's these certain session players that are good, that are just made for the studio, and that other people don't have that until like right away. And the only way to get that is doing this. Like, I think overdub recording leads to those types of players. It's like, that is the path. And then once you become one of those players, you're a professional musician that's going to be getting hired by everyone. It's quite a skill, and it's very valuable. And so start with overdub would actually be my main piece of advice and takeaway from this. You're going to benefit from it, even if it's not really the vibe that you originally imagined. I think you're going to come out of it being like, wow, that was so worth it. I am on another level now.
Yes, absolutely. I'd agree that overdubs is probably the way to go. And two things I want to add that just came to mind that will sort of give you the flexibility back that you get from live recording, at least part of it. There's one idea that I have, or that a lot of people do these days. That is, you can do things like, how to say this? So what I want to say is, a lot of the best musicians in the world embrace doing overdubs, even though they could record live. So that's one thing. It doesn't mean your band sucks. And what they do, and what like modern technology allowed us to do, is things like you could program the drums first, record the guitars to that, as long as, like, if you still want to make changes to the arrangement while you're recording, you could use programmed drums, record guitars, and if you then want to change a strumming pattern or something, you can easily do that in the programmed drums. And then after the guitars and bass and everything is recorded, you can then get rid of the programmed drums and record drums then, instead of doing drums first. Like a lot of metal bands do that these days, where they don't start with the drums anymore. They start with programmed drums, then they play guitars, then they record guitars and bass. They can do changes if they want to. It's still flexible enough with the MIDI drums. And then they get rid of the MIDI drums and record the actual drums once they know all the strumming patterns and stuff. So that's sort of an idea where you can do overdubs, but still have the flexibility to change the song as you record, in a way. So that is one thing. And then the other thing that I've done sometimes is, you could do overdubs, like plan the session as an overdub session, but you, instead of using scratch tracks, you could have someone in the control room or in your jam space playing along with the drummer, just a DI, as a scratch track, or as something that the drummer listens to while he or she's playing. And you only focus on the drum performance. You only view this as a scratch track, but you set it up properly. And in case magic happens and some great take happens to happen, and you can be like, okay, let's actually keep this guitar because this was great. And then you have done a live recording, but if it's not magic, you can still do the guitar again. So I've often done that, where I'd say like, okay, let's just play along with the drums, but we focus on the drum. All we focus on is the drum performance. So I don't really care if you make a mistake on the guitar. I won't stop the recording if that happens. But if you can manage to record a really great take altogether, I'm happy to keep the bass and guitars too. And maybe you can pull it off, and maybe not. Yeah,
absolutely. That's totally like a great method. Now I'm feeling myself want to start talking about recording techniques, like advantages to grabbing DIs and how you can playlist things and comp things together and stuff. But like, that is not the goal here. No. So I think maybe we wrap this up and leave people with that. Lots to think about there. Ultimately do both. Like for demoing, like recording your jams, if you can try doing it both ways, and like, both lead to different skill sets. So it's really a great thing to do either way.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Yeah, this is one of those episodes where it's more of a discussion than like a how-to episode, but I think it's still valuable. I hope it was. I hope it's helpful. As always, if you go, I didn't mention this very often in the past, but as always, if you go to the selfrecordingband.com/131, like 131, just the numbers, 131, you get to the show notes for this episode. This is always the case, by the way, for every single episode. So always the selfrecordingband.com/ and then the number of the episode will take you to the show notes. There you'll find a transcript. You'll find links to book a call or to hire Malcolm or myself for mixing, all these things. If we mention certain plugins or gear or whatever in the episodes, you'll find links to that there. In this case, you'll probably find an Instagram photo dump post of my race finish and stuff we talked about at the beginning. Like even the banter stuff we put in there. So it's just something that just came to mind. So if you go to the selfrecordingband.com/131, you get to the show notes for this episode. And if you have a question, or if you're still unsure about what to do, just email us or go to the selfrecordingband.com/community and join our Facebook group and start a discussion there. So you can always reach out, and I'm happy to continue this discussion. And I'm also curious to hear your experience with this, and maybe you've had a good or a bad experience with either live recordings or overdubs, and we're happy to hear those stories. So get in touch, and let's discuss this further.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun talking about it, so at least that happened.
Me too. All right. Thank you for listening, and see you next week.
For sure.
Bye-bye.
You know what? I'm going to throw one little shout out.
Yes.
So a song that just got released recently, it's called Anxious Heart by an artist called Jamie Hamilton. That was live drums, bass, rhythm guitar, really just a guitar. There's rhythm and leads in it, and keys in there as well. And acoustic. The acoustic guitar was in the room being tracked with a scratch vocal at the same time, but we redid that acoustic guitar and vocal. But everything else stayed. And then we overdubbed some more guitars, maybe a little more keys on top, and all of the vocals and a banjo and stuff like that. We farmed out and actually had that remotely sent in from LA or Nashville. So that's a cool, if you want to hear a song that was largely live, but also overdubbed on top of, that's a great song to check out. I'm super happy with how it turned out.
Awesome. Thank you. I will put that in the show notes, for example, so you can check that out. Perfect. All right. Then talk to you next week.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.